Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Dillian Whyte has taken the O of Jermaine Franklin in the United Kingdom, getting a majority decision 115 apiece and 116, 112, 116, 112. So these scorecards are going to divide opinion here because this was a relatively low volume fight where sometimes a little flurry at the end of a round probably was enough to actually get the round, because sometimes not a lot of action and a little bit of what do you like as well. But I do think 116, 112 feels a little wide, but Dillian Whyte really needed to take those later rounds, and that for me was what got him the decision here, because he was getting outworked for stretches of the fight, and even the punch stats supported that. Rounds 3 to about round 8. Jermaine Franklin putting in some decent work. He seemed to get a second wind, maybe about round 6, and that sort of carried him through for a few rounds, even rocking Dillian Whyte what was in the 8th or 9th round. I think it was towards the end of the 9th. But this was a sort of tactical heavyweight fight, and Dillian Whyte only has himself to blame for this being as close as it was, at least viewing it, because you had Whyte in there looking disinterested, not really sort of upping the pace or tempo and fighting the only sort of fight that Jermaine Franklin could win. But Franklin, to his credit, put in a good performance here, a good shift. He actually held up to Whyte's best punches and demonstrated a hell of a chin, especially towards the end of the fight where he caught some clean shots and almost was knocked down. And in that 12th round, Dillian Whyte was trying to take him out and landed some big shots, but Franklin, to his credit, stayed on his feet. But Dillian Whyte winning those last few rounds really is what sort of secured him the win, because it was looking a little bit dicey after about sort of 9 or 10 rounds, and with a number of swing rounds as well. There was a lot of low volume, close rounds, and I think this is going to divide opinion, those scorecards. So Jermaine Franklin himself said, look, I was robbed and I should have got the decision. I think you can make a case with a number of the rounds that actually, yeah, it could have been maybe a 7-5 his way. 116, 112 to Whyte, some people will say that's hometown cooking, but given the amount of swing rounds, I think you can also probably make a case for 116, 112. I had it a little bit closer, but I do think that this was a close, competitive fight where Jermaine Franklin showed his wares. He showed that he can compete at a certain level, but at the same time, with Dillian Whyte, he just looked a little bit lackluster, and we'll come to his comments in a moment, but he didn't fight like he was a top 10 fighter. And some people will say, look, he was coming off a loss to Tyson Fury. He needed the rounds. He needed to do X, Y, and Z sort of thing. But he looked pedestrian in there at times. He didn't look dynamic. He looked like he was a little bit out of ideas to try to break Franklin down. And a real big problem with it was he just didn't fight this fight at a good tempo, a good pace. There were spots in the fight where he upped his work rate, started to put it on Franklin, put his shots together, throw more combinations, and he looked good, and he was starting to clip Franklin and make a bit of a dent in him. But those sort of flurries were too few and far between. Dillian Whyte, I said after the Tyson Fury fight, I thought he was a bit past prime. I think the losses to guys like Alexander Povetkin, Tyson Fury, he's been in some hard fights. He's been dropped a number of times. He's had hard sparring. He's been a pro for a long time now, including, you know, obviously kickboxing as well. Dillian Whyte didn't fight like a top 10 fighter. His sort of response and sort of the comments after the fight, and I'll just get to them. He was talking about, you know, the new relationship with Buddy McGirt, and that influenced how he fought. I guess to his credit, one sort of notable change and difference, and something he was able to successfully defend against, was the uppercut. Fighting with a bit of a cross guard, and Whyte sort of even commented on that. Said they thought they could get me, but they couldn't. But he did talk about that, you know, he was boxing to new instructions and that this was hard, and he admitted he could have been more active. He said, look, I only had 6 weeks with Buddy McGirt, and look, I'm just trying to sort of bed things in. I guess you can maybe make a bit of a point that this is a new trainer, different from Xavier Miller training out of his comfort zone, new place, short time, new instructions. I guess maybe you could sort of make a case, but I do think that Dillian Whyte, the hard fights, the hard training, the hard sparring is catching up with them. I think a lot of people have been saying Dillian Whyte is shot. I do think that he is a guy that is now on the sort of downside of his career. Doesn't mean he's not a good fighter, and it doesn't mean that he can't be in some good fights and get some good paydays. But the fact is, if Jermaine Franklin had some more pop in his punches, he would have probably beaten Dillian Whyte and handily. And that was the thing with this opponent. It was very carefully matched. They picked Franklin because he's not a knockout artist. Sure, he's durable and demonstrated a great chin and gave Dillian Whyte some good rounds, and it was ultimately a good competitive back and forth fight. Probably more competitive than some people believe because they hadn't seen Franklin before. But Franklin largely fought how Franklin normally fights. You know, he does get into these close competitive fights with the likes of, say, Jerry Forrest and previously Rydell Booker, etc., and can have some good back and forth action. Sometimes it felt like you go, I go. That's the, you know, it was almost some sort of silent agreement. I'll get my work away, you get your work away, and it just was a little bit like that. And the pace suited Franklin to the ground, down to the ground, because he looked like he was starting to tire after about 4 or 5 rounds, but, you know, Whyte didn't put it on him, didn't work him into the ground. He got a lot of good body shots away, and I think that took a toll later in the fight. But the pace just wasn't enough to tire him out and break him down. And that was on Dillian Whyte, and he even admitted it. It was a decent heavyweight fight. It's not going to go down as one of those sort of all-time great battles. I know some people have some thoughts about whether Franklin was robbed or not. I think you can give this one to Dillian Whyte. I think either way, with the swing rounds, because it was such a low volume affair, some of it comes down to what do you like. And clearly one judge with the 115 did like Franklin's work rate and volume, because in some of those sort of mid-rounds, you know, earlier to mid-rounds, he was really putting in some good work and finishing rounds strong. He was sometimes snatching around in that final minute, you know, leaving that impression with at least one judge. But the other two clearly like some of the more eye-catching shots from Whyte, because there were some rounds where wasn't a lot happening, but Whyte might land an uppercut or a hook, something like that, or his body work, and that would sort of be the thing that would ultimately, well, presumably, for 2 judges at least, got him that round. But I did think that heading into those championship rounds, that he needed to finish strong. And he did, and he gets the decision here. But I do think that Dillian Whyte is on the decline. We're seeing signs of it. It wasn't a top 10 sort of fighter type performance. And based on that, I think we could probably say someone like an Anthony Joshua would go in a favorite. But then again, Joshua's got his own demons and durability questions, you know, with him, the chin open to the left hook, which Dillian Whyte obviously is a master at landing. I think, you know, yeah, there are open questions about both these guys. But DAZN clearly will want that fight to go ahead. Eddie Hearn, after it, spoke about still wanting to make that fight in 2023. He said maybe Joshua would have a fight before that fight would get made, but he sort of said maybe summer of 2023. So what's that, June, July time in the UK. And clearly with DAZN not having a lot of sort of top tier talent to, you know, bring in subscribers, that sort of stuff, Joshua versus Whyte clearly is something that they want to protect and have in 2023 as a big subscriber driver, probably going to be on pay-per-view as well. And let's face it, with a couple of other things falling over recently, a number of fighters leaving, that Conor Ben Eubank thing, you know, DAZN need a good 2023, and Matchroom have to deliver them some big fights for them to, you know, obviously be competitive in the market and financially pull in some revenue to keep going and justify things. Those big fights are something that they need at this point. No word about what Joshua's doing next in terms of an opponent, but apparently an announcement is coming soon. What did you make of the fight? I thought Jermaine Franklin fought well, credited himself well. I think he probably proved some doubters wrong. He doesn't quite have the snap on his punches to trouble some of these bigger, you know, names in the division, but certainly he's not going to embarrass himself if he gets thrown in with them either. Dillian Whyte looks so-so. Is this just due to the new trainer, or is it a symptom of something else that he is on the decline? Could be a bit of both, but I do think he is on the downslide now. Maybe that's not going to be a popular opinion with everyone, but hey, is what it is. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.